have to fear is
in war, there is no substitute for victory.
Let us never negotiate out of fear.
We stand undivided, forever united, fighting hand in hand for the liberty we've earned, for glory and honor, for our sons and daughters, ever mindful of the lessons we've learned. Let the torch of freedom burn.
Welcome to WallBuilders Live. This is the intersection of faith and politics. You can find out more about our program at our website, wallbuilderslive.com and wallbuilders.com. At wallbuilderslive.com, you can actually get a list of our 200 stations around the nation, find out if there's one local to you, and if there's not, hey, take some links from our program, send them out to those talk stations in your area, and ask them to pick up WallBuilders Live so you can listen anywhere and everywhere. But you can get us online, you can get us podcast, and you can also look at the archives and get some programs from the past few months, including our Good News Fridays, and on Thursdays we do a lot of Constitution talk, studying the Declaration and Constitution there on Foundations of Freedom Thursday. All right, for today, we're actually going to be diving into a three-part series with George Barna. Now, if you're not familiar with George Barna, you need to be. This guy is amazing. His research is incredible. And the number of books this guy has written, I don't know how somebody turns out so much information, and it's not light information. I mean, this guy dives into the details of what is happening in the culture, and he also deals with some very personal issues. I read a book that he did on parenting that was just phenomenal. It's called Revolutionary Parenting, and he takes the data and the information that they gain through intensive research and surveys and really spending time with people, not just a telephone poll, but actually going and visiting with people and really diving in deep. And he takes that data and that information, and he helps empower people. For instance, like me as a parent, his book helped to empower me to make better decisions as a parent and to recognize some of the things that I needed to adjust and change, and some of the things that I wanted to reinforce that his data clearly showed worked well with young people. So that's just an example, though, just the parenting. I mean, he does everything from politics to churches to you name it. I mean, he covered it to your own personal mission and purpose and vision. So just a ton of great information. I encourage you to visit his website, barna.org. That's BARNA.org. And we're going to get to have George Barna with us for the next 3 days here on WallBuilders Live. It's a presentation that he gave several weeks back at our ProFamily Legislators Conference. And I got to tell you, he had those legislators spellbound with the data that he's going to share with you. Some pretty shocking information about where the culture really stands right now. You know, it's unfortunate, but I think sometimes we stick our heads in the sand and we just pray that it's not as bad as sometimes we think it might be. We hope that the anecdotal stories we hear about things that are happening in the culture, we hope they're anecdotal, that they're not becoming the rule, that hopefully they're still the exception to the rule. And I got to tell you, the stuff he's going to share in the next 3 days is it's going to wake you up, and it's going to make you realize that you cannot sit on the sidelines and hope that the culture gets better. Every one of us has got to take an active role in returning to the principles that made America great in the first place. And George Barna is a master at helping us identify those principles, identify where we're losing those principles, and then help us shape the message that we are teaching to the next generation. So you're going to really enjoy this. It's a three-part series. If for some reason you're not going to be able to listen to the program the next couple of days, don't worry. It'll all be online by the end of the 3 days, and you can actually take all 3 days and share them with your friends. But before we go to the conference and actually hear from George Barna, let me just tell you a little bit more about him. He's a native New Yorker. He's been in major executive roles in politics, marketing, advertising, media research, and in ministry. So just about every area of the culture. You've heard about the 7 mountains, or as David and I like to talk about, the 5 different major cultural areas. Well, this guy's been involved in almost every single one of them. His research is used by churches, by people in the political realm, by nonprofits, and even in the military uses a lot of his research as well. He is frequently cited as an authoritative source, even by the media, let alone by folks like David Barton and myself and so many others that greatly respect what he does. Many, many, many pastors use his research as well. He's a popular speaker around the world, a graduate of Boston College, has 2 master's degrees from Rutgers University, and he and his wife live out in California, and he's just a phenomenal guy. We are honored to call him a friend, and really excited about bringing his presentation to you here on WallBuilders Live. Let's go join those legislators and listen to George Barna.
Proverbs 27 says to know the state of your flocks. And knowing the state of your flocks means you have to have information. So what you'll get this morning from George is kind of information on the state of our American flock. It becomes really key when you start communicating with people to know where they are. One of the things that was really cool about Paul in the book of Acts is Paul had 13 public speakings in the book of Acts. He only used the scriptures when he was inside the synagogues. When he was outside the synagogues, he used totally different communication. When he was on Mars Hill, he said, I see here you have an inscription. Your own poets have said, etc. And he found ways to connect with people on where they were at that point in time to move them to where he wanted them to be. So communication becomes real key, but that only happens if you know who your people are and what they're thinking and what they're believing. Part of this, we talked at the conference 2 years ago after the 2012 election. We saw what the ballot initiatives showed us in 176 ballots across the nation. It told us how we're going to have to change for the next 2 years to try to get in the right direction. So knowing the state of your flock, getting into what they think and what they believe is crucial for us to be able to go at the core roots and try to turn things around. George Barna, you have a bio on him, but George got started in political polling, doing campaigns. But he has done thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of polls. I don't think anyone better knows how America thinks than George, particularly how the faith community thinks. And so, again, that book you got, U-Turn, will have a lot of information on that in there. You really need to know that to know not only where you are, but where you think your allies are, the church people around you. They're not where you think they are. So, George Barna, you have a bio on him. George, come on, bro.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. This is actually my second time here. I was here last year. And I know at the end of the conference they ask you to rate all the speakers, and I know you did. So my presence here can only mean one thing, and that's that there was another speaker that dropped out. So, But anyway, I got to tell you, for pollsters, Christmas comes on Election Day. For us, the election is just a playground of information. It's like going to an amusement park for us. So this month has been a great month for us. One of the things that happens with elections is that if you would perceive America as having a portrait, elections allow us to touch up the portrait, to make little changes in terms of what's actually the current state of affairs. And what I want to do is spend my time here with you today telling you some of the things that we've found so far. And of course, we're still analyzing things, but what we've discovered so far. I think what happens in our country is with 24/7 commentary and news and hysteria about what's going on in the country, we tend to get so focused on little molecules of the whole being that we lose sight of the big picture.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. In the case Abingdon versus Shemp, the Supreme Court ruled that the Bible could no longer be an independent textbook in public school curriculum. Would our founding fathers have agreed? Benjamin Rush certainly would have disagreed. Benjamin Rush was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, and he was a leading educator of the day. In fact, he was the first founding father to call for free public schools. Benjamin Rush declared, "The great enemy of the salvation of man, in my opinion, never invented a more effective means of extinguishing Christianity from the world than by persuading mankind that it was improper to read the Bible at schools. The Bible should be read in our schools in preference to all other books." In the view of founding father Benjamin Rush, the Bible was the textbook of preference for public schools.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
And I want to give you hopefully a bigger picture of where I think things may be at today based on the numbers. Hopefully the numbers will speak for themselves, but I'll give you some thoughts around those numbers as well. You know, as we start out looking at what happened in the election, I know it's been said here before and said in a lot of places, and actually, oddly enough, it's true. 2014 was, more than anything else, a referendum on President Obama. I think the people spoke fairly clearly, but one of the implications of that is that we have to be very careful not to think that Republicans won. I mean, the reality of the race is the Democrats lost, and we happen to be the recipients of that loss. I think the victories that we've come by were hard won, they're justifiable and so forth, but we have to keep it in context. When we look at the fact that such an enormous amount of money was spent, just under $4 billion was spent on the campaign in total during this past cycle, it's amazing to realize that only half of the electorate says that they were reached out to by a candidate or a party during the course of that time. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes, but in fact, only about half of the electorate, despite all the coverage, said that they followed the campaign closely. And when you talk to those people who say that they followed the campaign at all and you ask them their impressions of it, they said they felt that it was more negative than past campaigns have been. 2/3 of the people who said that they followed the campaign at all said that. And increasingly what we're finding is that people are saying, yes, it's getting more and more and more negative. Now, that may or may not be the case. What I want you to understand is that when they say it's getting more and more negative, what they're really saying is the part that I paid attention to was more negative. Because in reality, I think some of the studies that we're starting to look at now will show that there was probably as much, if not more, substance that was conveyed to people during this past cycle, but people are not really well informed about what's going on. And so the reality is that they pay attention to the character assassinations and other kinds of things that really are not terribly substantive. What's very interesting to me about the mindset of the American voter right now is that only 2/3 of them say that they are very confident that their vote was actually counted when we look at the final tallies. And in point of fact, only 1/3 say that they're very confident that all of the votes that were cast were tallied. People are incredibly cynical and suspicious of the system itself, and particularly of the people who are in charge of that system. When we look at what happened and who got voted in, who got voted out, there's this notion of we have to throw the rascals out. It doesn't happen very often, and it didn't happen very often this time either. What we know is that in terms of the House, U.S. House of Representatives election, virtually everybody got returned. Only 4% didn't. We know in the Senate, 85% got returned. Gubernatorial races, 9 out of 10 got returned. So there was not a lot of change that takes place. Even though we keep talking about that happening, it's really on the margins where we see change taking place. I got to tell you, if you have a choice between being an incumbent or a challenger, be an incumbent, okay? It'll destroy your self-image when you hear what people say about you, but you'll still have a job. So that's the good news. When we look at the big picture of what happened in the elections, really I would suggest that the greatest gains were made at the state level, where most of you all do your work and your leadership. When we look at where things stand, things are good or better than they were, at least in the Congress now, in terms of who's going to hold those seats in the forthcoming Congress. But really, the greatest situation is at the state level. And I want to suggest to you that apart from the gains that we made at the state level, there are some really good things happening there. The Republican Party now controls 67 of the 98 partisan chambers or bodies across the country. And if you look at the South, it controls every state legislature in the South except for Kentucky, the House of Delegates there. But I think the neat thing about what's going on in the states is that part of the reason why change is possible is because the states are introducing the people to a higher quality candidate. many of you are exactly what I'm talking about. You know, we look at where did the people who got voted into Congress, got voted into the Senate, where are they coming from? They're coming from significant positions at the state level. Just as importantly, when you look at where the innovative policy thinking and enactment is coming from, again, it's coming at the state level.
This is David Barton with another moment from America's history. What is the purpose of government? Founding Father Oliver Ellsworth believed he knew. Oliver Ellsworth was a delegate at the convention which formed the Constitution, and later he became the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. Concerning the purpose of government, Oliver Ellsworth declared, "The primary objects of government are the peace, order, and prosperity of society." Yet how were these goals to be achieved? Ellsworth explained, "To the promotion of these objects, good morals are essential. Institutions for the promotion of good morals are therefore objects of legislative provision and support, and among these, religious institutions are eminently useful and important." Founding Father Oliver Ellsworth believed government could never reach its goals apart from the help of religious institutions.
For more information on God's hand in American history, contact WallBuilders at 1-800-8-REBUILD.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
When we're looking for solutions, if we continue to look to states for solutions, we're going to be much better off. We're starting to see that. And of course, some of the presentations you've heard here already give evidence of that. I think we can also continue to look at this election and say that it was more than just Obama bashing. The Republican Party actually did a number of things right in this election. There aren't that many times when I could have gotten up and said that, but I think this time around, some of the things that we saw, for instance, had to do with information systems. Prior to this election, the Republican Party and most of its candidates really weren't even in the game when it came to information systems. I'm an information merchant. This is what I traffic in year round, so I follow this stuff closely. But the reality is, with the whole move toward big data, the GOP has actually gotten in the game. And there are a lot of anecdotal stories, and now we're starting to get some of the quantitative evidence that Republicans actually ran a better ground game in many cases because they had real-time access to superior information to what the Democrats had. That's the first time we've had that situation in a number of years. So that's a very good thing. Of course, we talked about the higher quality candidates that we put out there for people to choose from. We had adequate funding. There were a number of disenfranchised voters in some segments, which we'll talk about in a moment, that Republicans did a good job of attracting. And while we're going to talk a little bit more about messaging, I think one of the things that Republicans did well was they consistently banged away at the idea that the Obama approach has failed us. A couple decades ago, of course, Ronald Reagan won office by asking over and over and over again, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago? And this time we simply changed the number. Are you better off now than you were 6 years ago? And people essentially said, well, no, I'm not. And so it gave them reason to think about the possibilities for change. But the ultimate end, of course, is getting people to vote. Now, here's where things start to fall apart as we look toward the future. Writing the book U-Turn with David was a great educational experience for me. David taught me a lot. And one of the things that I, as a result of his mentoring, went back and looked at was turnout historically in the United States. And when you go back into the 19th century, what you find is that turnout was huge. People thought that voting was really not just a responsibility, it was a privilege. It was something they were excited about. And they took it seriously. And what you find out is, for instance, in the middle toward the end of the 19th century, average presidential turnout was, close to 80%. And of course, that's fallen and fallen and fallen. In this particular election, turnout was 36%. That's the lowest it's been since 1942. And it probably would have been higher in 1942, but they had a good excuse. They were fighting a world war at that point. And so people were distracted. They didn't have the means to do that. So this time it dropped down to about 36.4% is probably about what we're looking at, which means we had just 82 million votes that were cast. Now, when we compare this to 2010, when the turnout wasn't much higher, but it was higher, what we find is that there were actually 14 states, obviously the competitive states, where turnout rose, but in 36 of our states, turnout was down. We're finding that more and more people are voting early. That has its ups and downs. One of the downs, of course, is that many of the people that plan to vote early forget to do so, and so we don't get the full benefit of that process. Another thing that we're finding from the research is that people continue to make their choices very early. We know, for instance, if we give people right now the two finalists for the 2016 general election, they'll tell you who they're going to vote for, and they'll be right in a majority of the cases. What we know in this particular cycle is that 60% of the electorate made up their mind about who they were going to vote for in key races in September. Another quarter of the electorate, 24%, made their choice up until the last week of the election, and then there were only 15% who made their choice in the final week of the election. Most people, once they make a choice, do not switch. Overall, throughout the course of the entire cycle, what we found, at least the last 3 months of the cycle, what we found is only 20% of people changed from where they were to what they wound up doing. And most of those were people who went from being undecided to actually choosing a candidate. So you've got to get to people early. We can't wait until the frenzied last minute, because most people have already made up their minds. When we look at the emerging pattern that's becoming fairly clear, it's that when you have high turnout elections, Democrats tend to win. When you have low turnout elections, Republicans tend to win. So 2016, we were the beneficiary of that rule of thumb because it was a low turnout election. 2016, it's going to be a different story. It's going to be a high turnout election. And so if we want to disrupt that pattern, we're going to have to be very intentional and very strategic about that.
Hey, this is Tim Barton with WallBuilders. And as you've had the opportunity to listen to WallBuilders Live, you've probably heard the wealth of information about our nation, about our spiritual heritage, about the religious liberties, about all the things that makes America exceptional. And you might be thinking, as incredible as this information is, I wish there was a way that I could get one of the WallBuilders guys to come to my area and share with my group, whether it be a church, whether it be a Christian school or public school or some political event or activity. If you're interested in having a WallBuilder speaker come to your area, you can get on our website at www.wallbuilders.com, and there's a tab for scheduling. And if you'll click on that tab, you'll notice there's a list of information from speakers' bios to events that are already going on, and there's a section where you can request an event to bring this information about who we are, where we came from, our religious liberties and freedoms. Go to the WallBuilders website and bring a speaker to your area.
Let the torch of freedom burn.
When we look at how the votes came down and turnout for different segments, part of the reason why Democrats lost as many races as they did was that there was significant loss in terms of turnout among the under 30 crowd. They represented 19% of the turnout in 2012. It was down to 13% this time. That will rise again in all likelihood in the next election, so we've got to be aware of and prepared for that. The Hispanic vote actually dropped from 10% to 8% this time, and even the female vote dropped from 53% to 51%. When we look at who actually switched in terms of segments, changing their mind compared to what would have been expected or what they've done in past elections. When we look at the past election, we find that there were some significant gains, maybe not sustainable, but nevertheless significant gains this time around, the most significant of which percentage-wise was among Asian Americans, where there was a 24-point switch shifting away from the Democratic candidates to Republican candidates. That's huge. Now, they only represent about 4% of the total voting population.
Well, we're out of time for today, folks. We're going to have to interrupt George Barna for a moment, and tomorrow we'll pick up where we left off today. If you're just tuning in or you missed the intro to today's program, we're doing a 3-part series with George Barna. Amazing guy. You got to check out his website at barna.org and read some of the research there, get his books and read them. Just phenomenal information, and we're thrilled to be able to have him as a guest at ProFamily Legislators Conference as a speaker for those legislators. That's what you were listening to there. In fact, you should check out that part of our website as well. If you go to wallbuilders.com and check out our events, we have once a year an opportunity for state legislators to come together and exchange ideas. It's a great time for them. It's also good for you as a citizen because it's going to improve your state because it equips those leaders to go back and make good laws, get rid of the bad ones. It's just great information. A lot of great speakers, including George Barna. And we're going to get the rest of George Barna's presentation tomorrow and the next day. So if you're going to miss one of those, be sure and tune back in on the website at wallbuilderslive.com, and you can get the 3-part series and share it with your friends. We'll look forward to being with you again tomorrow. Thanks for listening to WallBuilders Live.
We stand under